Greetings, fellow humans! This is kind of a different sort of wrap-up video for me. I keep starting new series, particularly this year, without finishing any. Many of the series I've started reading are brand new, and therefore I have to wait on the next book coming out in order to proceed in the series. But not all of them. So this month I wanted to focus on finishing two series I had started this year, both Uglies, which I first talked about in my July wrap-up, and Crier's War, which I first talked about in my June wrap-up. That being said, I don't know how to talk about series without mentioning spoilers for the preceding books in the series, so this is a warning that there will be spoilers in this review. If that's something that you're not interested in, then you can either skip ahead to the one standalone book I talk about this month, or skip this video entirely and I'll see you next month. I get it. Pretties by Scott Westerfeld. At the end of Uglies, Tally discovers that not only does the surgery change a person's appearance, but it also changes their personality, with lesions made on their brain to ensure all pretties are non-confrontational and care more about parties and what outfits to wear to them. Tally's friend, Shay, was operated on against her will, but fortunately there is a cure for the lesions. An untested cure. Tally hands herself over to get the operation, consenting ahead of time to be the test subject for the cure of pretty-mindedness. But once Tally is pretty, she has forgotten her promise and quickly is engulfed in pretty life. Her past of escaping the city to live with the rebel Smokies has made her one of the most famous people in town and secured herself a spot in the most popular clique called the Crims. Her blissfully ignorant life changes when Tally is given a message from her former self, along with a pair of pills claiming to be the cure to pretty-mindedness. Before she can be discovered by special circumstances and the pills taken away, her and the leader of the Crims, Zane, take the pills together. Suddenly, Tally begins to see life more clearly, and while Zane is also cured, he experiences extreme side effects that is causing him to slowly deteriorate. Tally knows she cannot depend on the city to fix Zane without both of them getting into serious trouble, so they devise a plan to leave the city in search of the smoke to save his life. I rated this book a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, but I'd actually give it a 3.5. It's definitely my least favorite book in this series, but I think that's more because of the nature of the story it had to be. Westerfeld is great at capturing personality changes in Tally throughout the books, and while she is a pretty-minded narrator, that causes the book to come across as very vapid and shallow, just as pretty life is supposed to be. One of the things I liked about the writing is the invented slang in the book, like bogus for something that's bad, bubbly for something that's good. Words combined with making or missing, such as nervous making or fashion missing. And I like that Tally continues to use this language in her narration even after she has taken the pill. That's something I noticed long before it was revealed that Tally's pill didn't actually do anything, and was essentially a placebo. I didn't particularly like the romance between Tally and Zane. I don't really know why. It didn't hold the same appeal as her romance with David in the first book did, and I was kind of expecting there to be a big reveal about Zane, that he was going to betray her, which is something I've often suspect when I don't like a romantic interest, and they always end up being boring, and Zane was the same. I continue to love Tally and Shay's friendship and its complexities. I love how they're once again good friends at the start of the book, and then end up on opposite sides at the end because of accidental betrayal. I love their constantly shifting relationship. There's obvious love and care between the two, but there's also a lot of hurt and misunderstanding. The twists and turns of their friendship feels realistic given what they're going through, rather than only for the sake of drama. There was also a handful of chapters after Tally leaves the city and gets trapped in an experimental preserve of humans who live in villages that are constantly at war with each other. This felt like such a weird sidetrack the story took only for a handful of chapters, and I don't know how much I cared for this world building. A character named Andrew Sampson Smith, who is a priest of his village that worships pretties and thinks of them as gods, is here introduced and has appearances in the next few books, but again, I'm not exactly sure how much he adds to the series overall. I also didn't care too much for some of the self-harm in this book. While Tally and Zane are stuck with these bracers that will alert the specials if they try to leave the city, they both spend a good portion of the book starving themselves in hopes of being able to weasel the bracelets off. And Shay creates her own clique that use adrenaline to counter the effects of pretty-mindedness. She calls this clique the Cutters because they do cut themselves in order to get that adrenaline rush. The way both these situations are handled, despite being actual self-harm, the book doesn't really treat it as such, which makes me uncomfortable to read it at times. Probably part of why this book is my least favorite. To be honest, the way The Uglies ended, I was so hyped to read this book, and it sort of ended up letting me down. It was still good, but the least mind-stimulating of the series. 3.5 out of 5 stars. Specials by Scott Westerfeld. Following the trend of the previous books, Pretties ends with Tally's recapture, and once again she is operated on, this time against her will. She becomes a special, part of Special Circumstances, an elite group of surgically altered soldiers who instill order upon the city. With this operation comes another mind alteration. Not only does Tally have superhuman senses, but she is prone to aggression and views all non-specials as beneath her. At the start, she is a loyal member of the Cutters, a group of young specials led by Shay, who have near complete freedom to operate however they wish. The only problem is Zane isn't with Tally. While he had also been recaptured by the city, Zane was instead reverted to being a pretty, though is still suffering from the same nerve damage from the cure in the previous book, and is mostly confined to his apartment. Tally can't stand seeing Zane this way and plots with Shay to figure out how to convince Dr. Cable, the woman in charge of the specials, to turn Zane into a special. Tally and Shay break into the armory in search of a tool to help Zane, accidentally destroying the facility in the process. Now the city believes it has been attacked, and for the first time since the Pretty operation has been created, the city goes to war. Now it is Tally's responsibility to stop humanity from repeating past mistakes before the casualties become too heavy. The writing style of this book is so crisp. I devoured the first 100 pages in one sitting, and keep in mind, I am a slow reader, so that is rare. Once again, Tally's narrative changes with her mindset, and Westerfeld does an excellent job relaying the adrenaline junkie, predator-esque person Tally has become as a special. It's honestly thrilling to read, and there's new slang that comes with it. Icy is a phrase that has replaced bubbly to mean good and exciting. Bubbleheads is what Tally refers to all pretties as now that she sees them as inferior to her. Even subtle changes like that really aids in the storytelling, and one of my favorite aspects of Westerfeld's writing in this series. From the start, it's obvious the city is changing and slowly Special Circumstances is losing control. The cure for pretty-mindedness is now being mass-produced and discreetly distributed throughout the city as people begin to fight back against the norm. Most of what is happening, Tally has been the catalyst for, but she's no longer the driving force of the rebellion, but rather allied with the exact forces she was rebelling against in the 2 prior books. I love this unique perspective. I also like how unimportant most of this is to Tally. She remains mostly concerned with her own personal goals for majority of the book, pretty much until war breaks out and it's kind of her fault and she realizes she might be the only person who can stop this war peacefully. And I like that Westerfeld takes time to explore Diego, the rival city which now houses the Smoke, a bit before heading into the finale because the way Diego operates gives readers an idea of how the world will function after society's collapse. In Diego, there are people who choose to remain ugly, people who choose to get the pretty operation and keep their pretty-minded brain lesions. There's people who get operations that make them look strange, such as an example in the book being people who get snake heads for fingers, which doesn't sound very practical. Like, if I had to choose an animal part to replace my fingers with, I think, like, octopus tentacles might actually be an improvement over human fingers, and not just for nasty reasons. Or however they want to look besides the cookie-cutter pretty design, and everyone cohabitates. No longer is there a distinct divide between pretties and uglies, and no mandatory way to look. People are instead allowed to do what makes them happy. One of the reasons I don't hate the love triangle in this series is because it almost doesn't even feel like a love triangle. Tally dates David, then she dates Zane, and at the end of the series she is never forced to choose between the two. There's no added drama because she has feelings for them both. Zane and David are both aware of each other and know they have both dated Tally at separate times. But there isn't that toxic competition between them that often comes with love triangle plots. The character of Andrew Sampson Smith has a minor role in this book, which I only like because it showed how, between the previous book and now, the Smokies have helped Andrew and his people escape their experimental imprisonment. But again, this is such a minor plot in the series, I don't really know if it needed to be included at all. And once again, I continue to enjoy the complex friendship between Shay and Tally. I like the respect Tally has for Shay at the start, and I also like that Shay finally gets to air her anger at Tally for her selfish acts prior in the series. They also finally get to reconcile with each other at the end, which I think makes it. If they never did, I think I wouldn't have been as pleased with the series as a whole. And I don't want to spoil the very ending, but I like the final scenes between Tally and Dr. Cable, especially after Dr. Cable has been upheld as this big bad character throughout the entire series. I rated this one a 4 stars on Goodreads, and I stand by that rating. Overall, this book wrapped up this series very well. Except, this isn't the final book in the series. Extras by Scott Westerfeld. Uglies was meant to be a trilogy, so I'm not sure at what point in the process Westerfeld decided to add another book on. When something like this happens, I can't help but think the author just wants to make a little more money off of the series, but I'll give Westerfeld some credit because he doesn't undo any of the progress made in the former 3 books, and instead, Extras has a new main character. 3 years after the mind reign that ended pretty mindedness, a new way of living has arose that focuses on everyone's face rank or how popular they are. Popularity means everything in this society and works as a currency as well. Main character Aya Fuse is obsessed with getting her name into the spotlight after her older brother Hiro became one of the most famous reporters, or kickers as they're called, in the city. As someone who is pre-operation, she struggles to get any attention at all on her feed, but she is just about to uncover her big story, starting with joining an underground clique called the Sly Girls, who reject public attention. While pulling a dangerous stunt with the Sly Girls to prove her loyalty and commitment to them, Aya and the clique uncover a secret entrance from which they witness a group of eerily, surgically modified humans exit. Aya isn't sure what she's found, but she knows it's big. A big enough story to launch her to the top of the face rank, attracting a dangerous sort of attention in the process. This story felt refreshingly different from the Uglies, which quelled any early concerns I had about Westerfeld trying to stretch the story even further just for cash. I think it did mostly come out of a unique idea to expand upon this creative universe. I did like seeing a completely different city and social structure than the original trilogy. While the original trilogy is highly implied to have taken place somewhere in the future United States, this book takes place somewhere in Japan. It's a nice change since the original trilogy did seem sort of painfully white. While race isn't mentioned in the first book, I think just how homogenous all pretties look, plus the implication that black-colored hair wasn't up to pretty standards, it really gave me the impression that pretties were very Eurocentric looking. What that means for anyone who isn't born white is something never explored by Westerfeld. With that being said, I'm not entirely convinced Westerfeld did a good job of embodying a future Japanese city in this book. I'm not an expert on Japan myself. I've never been there, and most of my knowledge comes from my anime phase back when I was in middle school, but many Japanese aspects in the book felt more stereotypical rather than culturally immersive. The only food ever mentioned is sushi. And Hiro has a luxurious fountain in his apartment which distributes green tea. I'm pretty sure honorary terms such as chan and sensei are used incorrectly. Like, it felt like something me as that 11-year-old anime fanatic would have come up with without actually having an understanding of Japanese culture. Is it possible Westerfeld wanted to make easily recognizable connections to Japanese culture that even ignorant Americans would catch? Possibly. Mostly it just came across as lazy to me. I've been so impressed with how relevant this series is to today, especially considering when it came out. While the original trilogy focused more on beauty standards, this book explores social media and the allure of social media fame. This book came out in 2007, which kind of amazes me considering that was only 4 years after MySpace was launched. 2 years after YouTube was launched, which, to be honest, I think YouTube was a main inspiration of this book, but also predates Instagram by 3 years, let alone things like TikTok didn't exist at all. Yet Westerfeld was able to essentially predict influencer culture, that prettier faces have an easier time of rising to fame, and a character, Nana Love, is so popular, her videos will get millions of hits about mundane day-to-day life. There's even a guy who's famous exclusively for his rant reviews. The economy in this book depends on good acts in exchange for merits, but the higher your face rank, the more free stuff is automatically given to you. Other than that, I think Westerfeld failed to capture the capitalistic side of influencer culture, that is, sponsorships and pushing items you don't even use to fans who will buy without question, as well as the invasion of privacy is never a big issue in this book either, which I found slightly unrealistic given what we know now, and especially since determining face ranks takes into account how often people's names are spoken in conversation, so people are being monitored. Regardless, I thought it was really neat coming from the time it did, and the fact that it still holds some truth. I mentioned in my Uglies review my annoyance with an overly normal family structure that both doesn't make a lot of sense and serves no purpose to the actual story, and I stand by that. Aya's parents are only mentioned in passing, mostly when she worries about getting scolded if they knew what she was up to. But her brother Hiro does play an important role throughout. He's the only sibling character mentioned throughout the entire series. I genuinely was starting to believe population control wouldn't allow for multiple children, but I did enjoy the sibling relationship between Aya and Hiro. There's teasing and rivalry, but also they worry about each other. Aya looks up to Hiro, whether she wants to admit it or not, and as jealous as Hiro is of Aya's newfound fame, he's also proud of her for how far she's come. And the romance felt like it was solely included because Westerfeld felt like he needed to give Aya a love interest. The story held my attention well until about 250 pages in, when Aya's fame has put her in danger, and Tally, the main character of the original trilogy, enters the scene. Before Tally physically shows up, I like the presence she has in the book. She has the #1 face rank in the city thanks to her notorious acts in the previous book. She's taught about in history class, and it's obvious that Aya views her as some larger-than-life hero. And what I did actually like about Tally having a part in this book is that she challenges everything Aya thinks of her. It's very much a never meet your hero sort of situation because Tally ends up causing more trouble for Aya than actually helping. But it also puts the story to a lull, as all the action circles around Tally, while Aya and her friends are being pulled along for the ride. Well, it makes sense given that Tally had been surgically altered to be the perfect soldier and Aya's a civilian. It's also a boring section of the book filled with inaction on Aya, our narrative main's parts. Like, it almost feels like Westerfeld forgot that Tally isn't the main character for a little bit. Eventually, Aya does begin to make decisions again, and the story picks up once more. This book overall differs in tone from the previous three. The main conflict isn't as deeply ingrained into society as it was in the trilogy. It's more like a rising threat they want to put a stop to, and there's an interesting twist on the threat too, which I really liked, as well as its relation to the title of the book, Extras. The story is almost lighter in that aspect, which is nice, but it also led to some disappointment. For one, at the very end, Aya gets everything she's ever wanted, and it just ends at this point where I feel like Aya has learned nothing throughout the entire book, and hasn't had any character development whatsoever. In fact, the character development at the climax is more about Tally's change of mind than it is Aya's. Though Aya is the person who aids in the change, so I found the ending unjustifiably happy and unsatisfying, kind of uncharacteristic for what I've seen from the rest of the series. Do I think this book needed to be included in the series? It could have ended at the third book, no problem at all. I did enjoy this book though. I did give it a solid 4 out of 5 stars, because I did have some issues with it, but I was impressed that it didn't feel like a weak cash grab story to market off of the success of the rest of the series. And now on to the next series I finished this month, Iron Hearts by Nina Varela. This is the second and final book in the duology, the first being Cryer's War. It's only been a few months since I read the first book, but I forgot how lore heavy it was. Starting Iron Heart, it took me a moment to remember what was happening and what the series was about, so I had kind of a slow start with this one while my brain caught up. Usually I don't like when a book recaps what has happened in the previous book in excruciating detail rather than simply making nods to the past. However, given that I was very disoriented at the start, I was pretty grateful that the first 50 pages of this book were pretty much all recap, even if it was just straight exposition without too much else going on. At the very end of Cryer's War, Lady Cryer's wedding to her kingdom's political enemy Uniq has been pushed forward, and Isla escapes from the palace after failing to assassinate Cryer. The story picks up a short time jump after that, with Cryer in preparation for her wedding and Isla having traveled to the opposing kingdom of Varn in search of her twin brother. Isla is welcomed as an ally to Queen June of Varn and begins training to become a spy to the queen. Meanwhile, Cryer is already having second thoughts about the marriage when she is approached by a human rebel who informs her that Uniq plans to destroy the Iron Heart. The Iron Heart is where Heartstone is harvested, Heartstone being the only sustenance an Automa needs to consume fairly regularly to stay alive. While Uniq is an Automa himself, he seeks to create a new life source he can monopolize in order to gain control of all Automa. After learning this, Cryer decides she can no longer go through their politically arranged marriage and approaches her father, the Sovereign, about the matter. The Sovereign claims he already knows what Uniq is up to and explains to Cryer that the only reason she was ever created in the first place was so he could wed her off in an instance like this to placate his enemy. The scene was kind of weak in my opinion, since in the prior book there was a similar scene where Cryer approaches her father like, "Hey, Uniq is kinda sus," to which he's like, "Yeah, I know, that's why I need you to marry him to keep in an ally." It felt repetitive of the scene from the first book, with nothing really new added to it, with the exception that Cryer is threatened to be replaced if she doesn't go through with the marriage. Anyway, after that, Cryer decides to disguise herself as a human and flees the kingdom, heading towards Varn. This section of the book I found interesting because Isla and Cryer almost trade roles for a little bit. For once, Isla is the one being pampered and caught up in politics, and Cryer is getting down in the dirt, scrambling for survival. It almost levels out any sort of inequality between the two characters, especially when Isla gets taught how to read, since this is also a romance between the two main characters. When it comes to reading LGBT books, I prefer stories without homophobia. I already experience it in real life, and when it comes to sci-fi and fantasy books, choosing to include homophobia is a choice. Like, this is the author's made-up world. I like in this book that the taboo isn't that Isla and Crier are both women. It's that in their home country, mixed-kind relationships are taboo. There are other same-sex relationships in the background in the book, and even one of the fairy tales Crier mentions is about two princes who are in love, which further normalizes that same-sex relationships happen and aren't frowned upon. When their separate paths finally reconvene and they're in Varn together, a country where humans and Automa are treated as equals and mixed-kind relationships aren't a big deal at all, they're able to witness that lack of judgment, which helps to further kindle their relationship. There's a cute scene where, as a cover story, they pretend to be wives, and who doesn't like a little taste of a fake relationship tropes? But overall, I do really like the slow burn nature of the relationship. I think it makes sense at the speed it moves, especially considering the amount of times Isla wants to murder Crier in the first book. But by the time they get together, I truly believe they both have feelings for each other. This book was a little scarier than the first one. That's a compliment. In the first book, Uniq invents a substance called Nightshade, which he hopes to use as a replacement for Heartstone. He tests it out by giving it to his most loyal followers, who use it without questioning, and in this book it's revealed what effects Nightshade has on Automa. It slowly poisons the user, turning their brains to mush, and causing them to be unable to feel pain, and they act feral. Any scenes with the shade Automa are so effectively creepy, and the concept really shows how heartless Uniq is to use his followers as guinea pigs. And there's a few other big reveals in this book that I totally didn't see coming, but also aided in my enjoyment of the books. One of them was also super creepy. Can't believe I didn't guess it. But the one issue I have with this book and the previous one is the main character's ages. I know this is a young adult, but I don't know that I believe Isla and Crier are only 16. Maybe it's because there's the engagement plot and later the pretending to be in wise plot. I know it's a fantasy world based on medieval times, so people probably did get married younger, but to me they felt more like in their 20s than teenagers. I feel like the only reason they are both 16 is to appeal to the young adult crowd. But other than that, I was really pleased with this duology. It's a really cool mixture of sci-fi and a fantasy setting. I love the lore of the world. I loved our two narrative mains and the way they interact with each other. I want more people to read these books and love them. Overall, a 5-star series through and through. Black and Blue Magic by Zilpha Keatley Snyder. This is the only standalone I read this month, and I read it specifically to review for the Galactic Journey, a site which I am now a contributor for. Galactic Journey is a portal into the past 55 years ago, living day by day. Writing my review for this book for that site, I had to write it as if I lived in 1966 and was reading this book brand new. It's a really fun concept to look at pieces of fiction within the context of the time they are released, and one of my favorite parts about the Galactic Journey is how it highlights parts of history and media that have been overlooked because they didn't fit the norm of white male. So it's a really cool online journal I highly recommend checking out. I've learned a lot from it. You can read my review for Black and Blue Magic in the link below, but for this video I want to talk about this book in the context of today. This book is considered a juvenile, though I'd place it at an elementary reading level. This is a light science fiction / fantasy book following main character Harry Houdini Marco. Harry was named after the great magician Harry Houdini by his magician father, who hopes Harry would grow up to be a magician as well. Now that Harry's father has passed, Harry has abandoned all hopes of pursuing magic, as he is a notably clumsy kid. As the summer starts, Harry laments it will be a boring one, as the vacation his mother had planned as a treat had to be cancelled when the tenant at the boarding house she runs moves out, leaving them with not enough money. More than anything, Harry wants to see his mother remarry, so she won't have to work as hard. He plots to set her up with one of the tenants he particularly likes, though his plans haven't worked out so far. His luck changes when Harry meets a peculiar man named Mr. Mazik. After returning Mr. Mazik's lost suitcase to him, Harry offers him a place at his mother's boarding house. Harry is later surprised to see Mr. Mazik has taken him up on the offer and moves in. While staying at the boarding house, Harry grows suspicious of Mr. Mazik as he appears to be more than just a salesman, as he claims. He discovers Mr. Mazik's suitcase is full of many magical objects, and that Mr. Mazik was once a great wizard who is now disgraced and under a curse. After all the help Harry has given Mr. Mazik, he gives Harry a gift from his suitcase upon his departure, a potion which, when applied to his back and the magic words are uttered, Harry sprouts wings. Every night that summer, Harry goes out flying, having silly mishaps and often helping people out without meaning to. As summer comes to its end, his potion is almost empty, and Harry has yet to set his mother up with a new husband. This book was adorable. When it comes to reading this far beneath my reading level, I try to gauge my rating on what I think younger me would have thought of this book. Without a doubt, I know I would have loved this book as a kid. Who wouldn't be thrilled by the magical ability to fly? I was also really into magicians, especially Harry Houdini, as a child. There's something really timeless about this book as well. It doesn't date itself as something that came out in the 60s. Even with the lack of technology in the book, I still could picture it occurring in modern day. I think that's one of the reasons that allows this book to hold up so well over the decades. I think the magic and the desire to fly is something that is so ageless as well. The plot is so sweet and pure. Harry genuinely cares about his mom, and him wanting to help her supersedes his own wants. But at the same time, he is still a kid and remains motivated by fun as well. The overall lesson of the book is that our actions matter, and even small things have a large meaningful impact. It's something that is subtly woven into the book, whereas I think modern stories aimed towards kids kind of have the tendency to pound their lesson into readers' heads without much nuance. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, if I could tell something was trying to teach me something, I get annoyed with it. Because I was just here to have fun, not learn something. That's probably a me specifically thing. But the one thing that did bother me about the writing of this book, and I think it would have also annoyed a young me as well, was the use of cliffhangers at the end of chapters. Only because a chapter would end on a very urgent note, and then the next chapter would prove that it wasn't that big of a deal. Which, especially since I read this in 2 sit-ins, was definitely a letdown. An example of this is when Mr. Mazik is about to leave the city. Harry invites him to stay with them again should he ever come back. Mr. Mazik then states the next time he will be in the city, Harry will be dead. The chapter ends there, leaving me feeling like something foreboding has just been hinted at. I flip the page, and then Mr. Mazik explains this is because he will next visit the city in 200 years, meaning he will outlive Harry's mortal lifespan, which instantly killed any thrill the previous chapter created. Other than that, I did really enjoy the book. The end pulls together several plots to a close in a surprisingly satisfying way and left me with a feeling of happiness and wonder that was strewn throughout the novel. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. It's not the most mind-stimulating read for an adult, but I think this would be an enjoyable read for parents to share with their kids, and for that I highly recommend it. So that's been my month. I'm happy to have marked off 2 series versus however many series I've begun reading but haven't finished yet. Next month I'll be back on my usual BS and read more of a variety of titles, though everything will be sci-fi for Sci-Fi September, starting with Dune, which I've gotten a head start on. Thanks for watching and please stay tuned.